You're a soldier standing on your city wall, gripping your weapon while terrible stories rush through your mind. Cities wiped out, bodies piled into towers, rivers stained red. And now the man responsible for all of it has reached your gates. Your commander chooses surrender. The conqueror promises mercy, swearing that not a single drop of your blood will be spilled. You believe him because you have no other hope. The gates open. Weapons fall to the ground. And only then do you understand the trap. The promise was real but twisted. Instead of killing you, his soldiers force you and thousands of others into huge pits carved into the earth. Dirt rains down as you scream, burying you alive in darkness. And he can proudly say he kept his word. No blood spilled. This nightmare truly happened. Carried out by the man the world would come to fear, Tamerlane. A ruler who destroyed millions, built towers from skulls, and committed acts so brutal that even medieval writers struggled to describe them. Before we explore the horrors he unleashed, you need to understand who Tamerlane really was. He wasn't some wild brute swinging a sword without thought. He was intelligent, educated, and frighteningly calculated. He loved poetry, supported artists, spoke several languages, and planned battles like a chess master. Somehow this made him even more terrifying because every act of cruelty he committed was deliberate. He was born in 1336 in what is now Uzbekistan. His name was Timur, and he later became known as Tamerlane, Timur the Lame, after an injury left him with a permanent limp. He came from minor nobility and used a mix of charm, strategy, and ruthless force to climb to power. Claiming descent from Genghis Khan, he dreamed of rebuilding the Mongol Empire. But he used fear in ways even Genghis never imagined. Most conquerors wanted cities alive, so they could tax them and rule them. Tamerlane didn't care. If a city resisted, or worse, rebelled, he didn't just punish it, he erased it. His cruelty was so effective that entire cities surrendered the moment they heard he was coming. Fear became his strongest soldier, and he fed that fear again and again. Tamerlane's reputation spread so far and fast that by the year 1400, soldiers across continents feared his name more than death itself. That fear reached the city of Sivas, in what is now Turkey. The city's defenders, mostly Armenian soldiers, knew exactly what he had done to other places. They had heard the stories of cities wiped out and people punished in ways too horrible to imagine. When Tamerlane's huge army appeared, the defenders faced a choice with no real hope: fight and die, or surrender and pray the rumors were exaggerated. After a short siege, Tamerlane sent them an offer. He swore on his honor that if they surrendered, not a single drop of your blood will be shed. In medieval warfare, such oaths had real weight. Commanders were expected to keep them. After long debate, the soldiers surrendered. They marched out in arms, expecting to be spared. Instead, they found giant trenches waiting outside the walls. Tamerlane had kept his promise, just not the way they expected. His men forced the soldiers into the pits alive. Then came the dirt, shovels, carts, then full loads of earth poured over their bodies as they screamed and suffocated in darkness. Not one drop of blood spilled, exactly as he vowed. The message spread across the world. Tamerlane's mercy was just another form of terror. The buried soldiers of Sivas were only Tamerlane's warning. What he did next showed that he wasn't simply punishing enemies. He was wiping entire places off the map. His next target was the proud city of Urgench, one of the richest and most beautiful cities in Central Asia. It sat along major trade routes, full of scholars, merchants, libraries, markets, and a long history of culture. Any other conqueror would have wanted to rule such a place, but Urgench made a fatal mistake. It rebelled. To most leaders, rebellion meant removing a few officials or punishing the leaders. But Tamerlane treated rebellion as a personal insult. He returned to the city with one goal: erase it completely. His army surrounded Urgench, broke through its defenses, and then he gave an order that shocked even his own men: destroy everything. This wasn't just a massacre. It was the end of a city. Houses, markets, libraries, mosques, wells, every structure was torn down. What had taken generations to build was reduced to rubble. Some records even claim he ordered the ruins plowed and planted with crops, turning a once great city into farmland to show it would never rise again. Whether every detail of that story is literal or symbolic, the message was clear. Urgench didn't just fall, it vanished. And the world understood that when Tamerlane took revenge, he didn't leave anything behind. If destroying Urgench showed how Tamerlane punished rebellion, the city of Isfahan proved something even more frightening: that even surrender could not protect you. When his forces reached Isfahan in 1387, the city's leaders wisely chose not to fight. They opened the gates, paid taxes, and accepted his rule. For a short time, life continued. Markets stayed open, families remained in their homes, and the people believed they had avoided disaster. But then anger over new taxes sparked a local uprising. At first, It was only small groups resisting the officials Tamerlane left behind. Then the unrest grew, and soon the city's people attacked and killed many of his soldiers. Tamerlane saw this not as rebellion, but as betrayal, the one thing he hated most. He returned to Isfahan with a single goal: make an example no one would ever forget. His orders were strict and cold. His soldiers spread through the city, and what followed became one of the most infamous punishments of the medieval world. Historical records say tens of thousands died, though the exact number is debated. But what made this event unforgettable was what came next: the creation of tall structures. Built from the remains of the dead, travelers wrote about these grim towers for years. They stood openly in the city, visible to anyone who approached, a permanent warning carved into the landscape. Whether the numbers were exaggerated or not, the sight of those towers turned Tamerlane's name into something larger than fear. It became a legend. By the late 1390s, Tamerlane's empire stretched across huge parts of Central Asia and Persia. But he wasn't slowing down. Even in his 60s, an age when most rulers could barely ride a horse, he was preparing for his next conquest. His eyes turned toward India, a land known for immense wealth, powerful cities, and rulers who believed their armies and fortresses were strong enough to resist anyone. At that time, northern India was controlled by the Delhi Sultanate, a rich kingdom filled with trade, culture, and huge armies. Tamerlane announced a reason for invading. He claimed the Sultan wasn't strict enough with his subjects, but everyone knew the truth. He wanted the treasures, the cities, and the glory. He gathered an enormous army and marched south. As he moved through India, villages and towns fell one by one. Some tried to fight, some surrendered, but the result was almost always the same: destruction, fear, and thousands taken captive. By the time he reached the outskirts of Delhi, Tamerlane's forces had captured so many prisoners that they didn't know what to do with them. Historical sources say there were around 100,000 captives following his army, which was more than some cities had in total population. Tamerlane saw them as a danger. If they rebelled during the coming battle, his forces could be trapped. So he made a cold, calculated decision to eliminate the risk entirely. Soon after, he clashed with the Sultan's army outside Delhi in a huge battle that changed Indian history. The Sultan's greatest weapon was his war elephants, massive animals armored in metal and trained to break enemy lines. Many believed these elephants would crush Tamerlane's army, but he had already studied their tactics. At the moment the elephants charged, he ordered a strange maneuver. Camels loaded with burning grass were driven toward the elephants. The panic spread instantly. Confused by fire and smoke, the animals turned and ran back through their own troops, breaking the formation and creating chaos. That chaos gave Tamerlane the victory he needed. Delhi's gates fell, and the city that had once been one of the richest in the world was left defenseless. What followed over the next several days was a wave of destruction so severe that chroniclers compared it to the end of the world. Entire neighborhoods were emptied, fires spread across the city, and anything valuable was taken. Libraries, treasures, skilled workers, and precious goods were shipped back to his capital. It took Delhi more than a century to recover. A city that had once stood as a symbol of power and culture was reduced to ruins, smoke, and silence, another place marked forever by Tamerlane's shadow. After Delhi, the world should have understood Tamerlane's pattern. Any city that resisted him suffered. Any city that rebelled after surrender suffered even more. And then came Baghdad, one of the most famous cities in human history for centuries. Baghdad had been the center of learning, science, medicine, mathematics, art, and culture. Even though it had declined from its golden age, it was still a place of enormous influence. Tamerlane had conquered it once already, and the city had accepted his rule. But when he left on other campaigns, a former ruler managed to seize it back. To Tamerlane, this wasn't just rebellion. It was humiliation. By 1401, he returned to Baghdad with a massive army and one intention: to make an example that no one would ever forget. After a long siege, the city's defenses collapsed. But instead of treating this like a normal conquest, Tamerlane issued one of the strictest orders ever recorded. Each unit in his army was required to bring back a specific number of victims to prove they followed his command. This turned the invasion into something mechanical and terrifying. Soldiers moved through the city methodically, knowing they had a quota to meet. The scale of loss was so great that historians still debate the exact number. Estimates range widely, but all sources agree that the destruction was enormous and the city was left shattered. And just like in Isfahan, the remains of the fallen were gathered and used to build tall, grim structures across the city. These towers were not hidden. They were placed openly at major crossroads and gates. Travelers wrote about them for years afterward. They became symbols of what happened to those who defied Tamerlane. warnings that could be seen from a distance long before entering the city. He also ordered major buildings, palaces, libraries, halls of learning, to be torn down. Only religious sites were spared, not out of mercy, but as a calculated message. He wanted people to see that he was punishing disobedience, not challenging faith. When he finally left Baghdad, the city was barely recognizable. Markets were empty, streets abandoned, and entire neighborhoods silent. People who survived fled, leaving behind one of the world's greatest cultural centers in ruins. Even after the towers fell apart over time, the story stayed alive, spreading across kingdoms, shaping the way entire empires viewed him. With Baghdad, Tamerlane had perfected his strategy of fear. His name alone could make cities surrender without a fight. His actions show that he didn't need to rule through loyalty, respect, or stability. Terror was enough. By the time Tamerlane finished with Baghdad, his message had reached every corner of the known world. He didn't need endless battles to expand his empire. His reputation did most of the work. Cities surrendered before he even arrived, hoping to avoid the fate of Sivas, Urgench, Isfahan, Delhi, and Baghdad. Fear was the strongest weapon he ever created, and he used it with perfect precision. In just a few decades, he built an empire stretching from Russia to India and from Turkey to the Persian Gulf. Yet the foundation of that empire was never stable. It was held together not by loyalty or shared purpose, but by terror. And terror cannot hold an empire forever. When Tamerlane died in 1405, while preparing for a huge invasion of China, everything he built began to fall apart. His descendants fought one another, the territories broke apart, and his empire slowly collapsed. But one thing survived: his legend. People remembered his name long after the cities he destroyed were rebuilt. Stories about him were told across continents. Tales of the ruler who used fear like a tool and erased entire places when he felt betrayed. The structures he built from destruction eventually crumbled, but the memories did not. In a strange way, he achieved the one thing he always wanted: to be remembered forever. Now the question is yours to answer. Which act strikes you as the most disturbing? Was it the soldiers buried alive at Sivas, the total erasing of Urgench, the chilling towers raised in Isfahan, the devastation of Delhi, or the strict punishment imposed on Baghdad? Each one shows a different part of Tamerlane's strategy, fear used as a system, not just an emotion. If you've read this far, you're clearly someone who wants to understand the darkest side of history, the parts most schools and documentaries avoid. These stories remind us that some of the most terrifying figures were not legends or movie villains. They were real people who walked the earth, led armies, and changed the world in ways that still echo today. Stay curious, stay aware, and remember, the scariest monsters are always the ones who truly lived.